Perfectly well disposed to execute the commission, and quite as desirous as Sir Matthew could be that the proud poor lady who had ever treated her with haughty coldness should be properly humbled, she darted towards the door in order to perform her errand. But Martha, remembering the manner in which she had left her stepmother engaged, stepped forward to prevent her, quietly saying, "If my father wishes to see his wife, Mrs. Gabberly, I can go for her without troubling you, and I really wish you would permit me to lead you downstairs to your donkey chair at the same time. I am sure you must be aware that papa is not in a state to bear seeing company." "You're quite right, my dear, quite right indeed. Sir Matthew is looking sadly wild and feverish, and I should say that nobody whatever but the doctor and his own family ought to see him. Of course, I suppose it would not be very convenient to hire attendants now, for these sort of people, I am sorry to say, always insist upon ready money, which is a cruel thing under such circumstances. But so it is, and therefore it follows that you and Lady Clarissa must be chief nurses." "Certainly, ma'am. It will be his own family who will wish to attend to him, and therefore, if you please, I will take you downstairs and see you to your carriage." "Me, my dear!" cried Mrs. Gabberly, in the shrillest possible tone. "Surely you cannot mean to call such an old friend as I am company? No, no, my dear Martha, don't think me such a brute. I would not leave you just yet for the whole world. You shall go yourself, my dear, if you will, and bring her ladyship up. I will stay here quiet as a mouse, and watch by your poor papa. But perhaps it might be as well to desire that the young man to finish with his scribbling, and get out of the room. He must have gone over everything by this time, mustn't he? I will have her right honourable ladyship here before that fellow stirs a step, Martha. Do you hear me? That's more than half the fun," cried Sir Matthew, bursting into a shout of laughter. "Doesn't she know our kind, clever, observing neighbour, who has come here so thoughtfully just to look about her a little? Doesn't she know her almost as well as I do? And won't she enjoy thinking what a pleasant description dear Miss Gabberly will be able to give of my Lord High Landlock's sweet daughter, watching the broker and seeing that he sets everything down fair?" Thankful was Martha that the supposed broker was one who could not in reality add to the horror of the scene. She turned to him as she left the room, saying, "You had better remain here, if you please, till I return." Upon which he modestly ensconced himself in a distant corner, and resting his paper upon a commode, continued, as he stood, to scribble upon it. Quite certain that it would be impossible to get rid of Mrs. Gabberly till her father's summons to his proud wife had been obeyed, and greatly more anxious to clear his room of this troublesome guest than to spare the feelings of her ladyship, Martha entered the little sitting-room, determined to deliver the message concerning the diamond ring, if she could not prevail without it. She found Lady Clarissa in the act of finishing the packing of her basket, by laying on top of it sundry light articles of female attire, very cleverly calculated to make the whole pass under the general description of wearing apparel, which the courtesy of the law permits to be removed by all persons in the unfortunate situation of her ladyship. "Now, I will hope you will cease your impertinent preaching, Miss Martha," she said, as the pale and agitated young woman entered the room. "Unless every separate nightcap and frill are to be examined by one by these brutes, I conceive no objection can be made to this package. Gather up the cotton wool, and poke it somewhere out of sight directly." Martha obediently set herself to collect the scattered fragments of the suspicious-looking wool, but as she did so said, "My father wishes to see you, Lady Clarissa." "Insolent wretch!" exclaimed her ladyship, pausing in the act of collecting various little articles for which she had not found room in the basket. "Have you the audacity to bring me this as a message?" "My father says, Lady Clarissa, that as you are going to leave him to-morrow, he should wish to see you once more," replied Martha. "Monster!" screamed Lady Clarissa, stamping her foot upon the floor. "He see me again? He dare to lift his bankrupt eyes upon the noble woman he has so basely injured? Tell him, you bold messenger, who fear not to face the descendant of a dozen earls to convey to her the words of a bankrupt cotton spinner, tell him that the only atonement he can make is to die. Tell him this for me, and may the ostentatious settlement his unprincipled pride made on me excuse me in some degree in the eyes of my noble brother for the degradation I brought upon him by accepting it. These last words were uttered with clasped hands, raised eyes, and fervent accents, and all other ordinary indications of uttering a prayer. Indignant and disgusted, Martha felt no scruple in employing the means her father had given her for obtaining the interview he had desired, and quietly said in reply to this burst, "My father stated that his motive for asking to see you, Lady Clarissa, proceeding from his wish to present you, as a parting gift, the diamond ring which he wears on his right hand." The effects of these words was as sudden as that produced by the magic touch of a hand employed in turning off gas. "That indeed is most a natural wish. Unhappy, guilty man, I can well believe that had he the crown jewels at command, he would deem them all too poor but an offering to atone for the offence he has committed against me. I thank God, Martha Dowling, that my noble blood has never taught me to forget that I am a Christian. There are many women, believe me there are, of less exalted rank than myself, who would not deign to obey such a summons. But I feel what my duties are, and I shall nerve my courage to perform them. Come with me to my dressing-room, Martha, carry that basket for me, and then I will go with you to the bedside of Sir Matthew." Martha attempted to obey, but the basket was too heavy for her to carry, and she set it down again, declaring that the task was beyond her strength. "A tolerably good joke, that," said Lady Clarissa, endeavouring to laugh, "considering your origin. But this is the last day of such pleasant jestings, and therefore I must bear with it with good humour, I suppose." Then, applying her own much stronger hand, she lifted her treasure and was stalking off with it, but stopped short ere she reached the door, saying, "No, I will stay here while you go and fetch my faithful Mistress Saunderson. She enters into all my feelings, thank God, and is as strong as a Highland pony in the bargain." Having obediently performed this commission, and brought back the faithful Scot waiting worn, who had adhered very steadfastly to her mistress through all the vicissitudes of her fortune, Martha at length succeeded in marshalling the Lady Clarissa Dowling into the bedroom of her husband. No signet ring ever made a deeper impression on wax than the diamond one of Sir Matthew had done on the memory of his noble wife, and her first glance as she entered the room was direct to the hand which lay on the bedclothes, that she might see if it had been already removed. But no, there it sparkled still, and with a gentler aspect than she had been seen to wear since the tremendous hour when the declension of Sir Matthew from the richest commoner in the country into a bankrupt had been announced to her. She said, "You wish to see me, Sir Matthew? Martha says you wish to see me." "Yes, my beloved," said the knight, "I do wish to see you, angelic sweetness. How can I do otherwise? Look at yourself in the mirror, most beautiful Clarissa. Look in the mirror before that broker there carries it off, and tell me if you think it possible that any man could bear to part with so much beauty without having one final gaze upon it. And see, my dear, here is your amiable neighbour, Mrs. Gabberley. Is it not kind of her to leave all other visitings, that she may come to nestle herself here among the very brokers, in the very centre of our misery? Is it so heavenly minded of her, isn't it? I guess, indeed, that one great reason for her making such a tremendous sacrifice was the hope of edification from beholding the Christian spirit with which your ladyship bears your ladyship's overthrow, and besides her own improvement from it, she wishes to have in her power to describe it to the whole neighbourhood. Very right of her, isn't it, my dear? That is the reason why I sent for you." In general, the nose of Lady Clarissa greatly outblushed her cheeks, which had more of the jonquil than the rose in them, but now, from the tip of her high forehead to that of her long chin, she became crimson, and but from the remarkable length of her throat, which seemed to rear itself in defiance of such danger, a fit of apoplexy might have been expected. "Begone, you vulgar gossip-picker!" she cried, turning in uncontrollable rage upon the terrified little woman, "and tell the contemptible neighbourhood through which you are going to crawl in your donkey cart like a snail in his shell, leaving your slime as you go. Tell them all, for me, the best consolation under my remorse for having forgotten my own dignity by condescending to hold a place among them, arises from being released from the degradation of associating with so contemptible a being as yourself, and all who are capable of listening to you." And having uttered these words in a piercing voice, she rushed to the door, threw it with a great violence wide open, and so left it, as she paced with rapid but tragic strides, to the shelter of her own boudoir and the sympathy of Mistress Saunderson. It was, perhaps, because the door was open, and that he knew the sound would follow her, that Sir Matthew burst into the most violent shout of laughter that had ever made itself heard from mortal lungs. It terrified Martha, made Mchl shudder, and caused Miss Gabberly herself to wish she were anywhere else, notwithstanding the very valuable information this extraordinary scene would enable her to communicate. Long did this frightful laugh continue, and when strength seemed to fail and the boisterous merriment could be sustained no longer, a vehement and reiterated hiss followed, which at length ended in such a complete exhaustion that Sir Matthew fell back pale and apparently motionless upon his pillow. "Miss Gabberly," said Martha, "I must beg you to leave us now. You must perceive that my poor father ought to be alone. It is very important, fearfully important, I am afraid, that he should be kept perfectly quiet. Give me leave to wish you good morning." "I must say that it does seem very odd in you, Miss Martha, to persist in calling me company. Good gracious, to think of the term on which I have always been in this house before your poor papa's unfortunate marriage. I cannot and I will not leave you in such a condition. It would be perfectly monstrous, and everyone would call me a brute for it. Till Dr. Crockley has been here, I really neither can nor will go. I am quite determined that I will hear what he says about him." "Let her stay," said Sir Matthew in a hollow whisper, which proved that he was neither asleep nor dead, though through his closed eyes and ghastly countenance might have been mistaken for one state or the other. Martha went to him, took his hand, wiped the profuse perspiration from his brow, and then placing herself in a chair beside him, continued to watch his altered countenance, alike unmindful as it seemed of the presence of Mrs. Gabberly or that of Mchl either. The lady, perfectly contented to be thus quietly established as looker-on, determined for the present neither to move nor speak, lest she might lose the valued privilege thereby. But Mchl became so conscious of the awkwardness of his situation, and so fearful lest Martha, from forgetting him, might get into a scrape likewise, that he ventured to approach the foot of the bed on tiptoe, merely for the purpose of recalling himself to her recollection, and then, on seeing her start at the sight of him, he said in a whisper, "I suppose I had better go downstairs now, Miss Martha?" Martha replied to this nod affirmatively, and in the same low tone added, "I shall have other business to speak to you about. Do not go away until you have seen me." Mchl's eyes were naturally turned to Martha while this passed, but when he withdrew them and was about to make his retreat, he caught the large, wide-open, wild-eyed eyes of Sir Matthew fixed earnestly upon him. The young man involuntarily dropped his eyelids, for the gaze was a frightful one, and turned to leave the room. "Stay!" roared a hoarse but loud and stunning voice from the bed. "Stay, devil, demon, hellbird! What do you come here for? Cowardly blackguard! Do you think I do not know you? You never dared to come till it was too late for me to hold you. I have heard of your purring round the place weeks ago, but you escaped me then, base runaway. What do you come spying here for? Do you think I should not know ye? Do you think I should forget those damned hypocritical eyes and that hateful curly hair of that devil's own color? No, my pretty prentice, I've not forgotten your crocodile look, and never shall. I suppose you thought you should bring me to repentance by sending home word that you were dead. Was that it, eh?" "I am able now, Sir Matthew, to pay for leaving the mill before my time, and I am quite ready to do so, if you please," replied Mchl gently. But he spoke to one who had heard him not. Sir Matthew had a neck as short and thick as that of his lady was long and thin. His last interview with her had not been a salutary one for a man in his state of mind and body, and the subsequent discovery of Mchl, of whose visit to the factory he had heard from Parsons, and at whose escape he expressed the most unbridled rage, accelerated symptoms which had before threatened him, and sent such a rush of blood to the brain as instantly produced apoplexy, and left him totally deprived of sense and motion. Martha, whose eyes were now fixed upon him, uttered a fearful shriek, and threw herself on the body, believing that he was dead. But Miss Gabberly knew better. She had practised too long an amateur not to know a fit of apoplexy when she saw it, and promptly exclaimed, "Get away, Martha! Get off him, child! He is not dead, I tell you, and if we could but bleed him, he would open his eyes again fast enough." With the rapidity of lightning, poor Martha obeyed. She withdrew herself from the bed, endeavoured to raise her father in her arms, and, by help of Mchl, succeeded. She then bared his arm, bound her own waist belt tightly round it, and with unshrinking courage had thrust a sharp penknife, which she drew from her pocket, into a vein, before the skilful lady who had prescribed the measure had half recovered her astonishment on perceiving that the poor girl had conceived the project of putting it into immediate execution. The old adage that "where there is a will there is a way" was never better illustrated by this act of the tender-hearted and invalided Martha. She felt that her father's life hung on the promptness with which the operation was performed. She felt, too, that if she was shrunk from it there was no one else that would perform it, and, totally forgetful of herself and her own feelings, conquered the rebellious weakness that would have held her hand, and did what 2 minutes before she would have believed it utterly impossible she could have done. The result did honor to the skill of Mrs. Gabberly. The lazy current flowed, though reluctantly. Sir Matthew opened his large eyes, rolled them from side to side, heaved a deep and heavy sigh, and presently attempted to speak, but this was beyond his power. "What more should be done?" said the pale and now trembling Martha, turning towards Mrs. Gabberly. "Why now, my dear, you must just let him alone for a little bit," replied the physician by hereditary right. "Well now," she added, "wasn't it a blessing that I was here? If I had not stayed, he would have been as dead as mutton by this time."